Ted Cruz thought he was walking onto a stage built for a constitutional reckoning on his terms, a platform to reclaim the narrative and remind the country of his strict originalist vision. What he didn't expect was that Elizabeth Warren had arrived first, armed not with fanfare, but with footnotes, case law, and 2 decades of political scars etched into every sentence she carried. The Emergency Constitutional Forum was not officially a debate. It was billed as a conversation about the boundaries of executive power in a polarized America. But the moment the camera swept across the room, it was clear. This was a confrontation long overdue. Moderator Kristen Welker took her seat with the poise of someone who already knew the headline, who defines the limits of power and what happens when no one does. Cruz leaned forward, hands clasped like a wartime strategist. The institutions failed because they got weak, he began, voice even. I did what others wouldn't. I led, without hesitation, without apology. Warren didn't interrupt, she waited, and then responded, slow and surgical. You didn't lead through failure, Senator. You took advantage of it. You saw a crack in the system and called it a calling. Cruz smirked, spoken like someone who let Harvard lectures shape national policy while real Americans waited for results. I didn't just talk reform, I cleaned up what you left in chaos. Warren's smile was thin. You didn't clean up. You dressed chaos in the Constitution and called it courage. You led with fear, with spectacle, with selective silence. Kristen cut in, sharp and measured. Senator Cruz, your critics say your interpretation of executive power has gone further than any in recent memory. Do you stand by your actions? Cruz didn't blink. Because I had to. Obama second-guessed. Biden stalled. I moved. History doesn't remember hesitation. It remembers motion. Warren raised an eyebrow. History also remembers who ripped out the brakes just to prove they could drive. Cruz leaned back, arms spread slightly. I enforced the law. Warren's voice was precise. You enforced it selectively. You turned enforcement into performance, not justice, optics. Cruz's tone hardened. The courts upheld my actions. Warren, calm and unshaken, replied, temporarily, until they looked again, until the dust settled and the damage became measurable. Kristen tried to thread a bridge. Is there any common ground between you two? Warren answered first. One thing, a democracy can't wait for elections to fix what it already knows is breaking. Cruz scoffed. You speak like you're still in charge. You act like no one else governs, except you. Warren didn't blink. She turned slightly as the screen behind them lit up. A clip from an earlier national broadcast on The View. Her voice echoed on screen. He's not governing. He's choreographing a purge. He's not removing policies. He's removing people. That's not government. That's theater dressed in patriotism. Cruz didn't look, but the country did. Warren stared into the lens and said nothing. The video said it all. The clip returned to black and white, raw, undeniable. The View hadn't invited her for nostalgia. They handed her the mic because the public had stopped listening. Now they were forced to. Kristen turned toward Warren. Do you stand by those words, Senator Warren? She didn't hesitate. I do, and I'm here because too many didn't hear them the first time, or refused to. In just 18 months, ICE conducted over 6,700 raids without due process, many under sealed or retroactive warrants. Over 900 people remain unaccounted for. No trial, no detention records, no release forms. These aren't policy errors. These are disappearances. Cruz smirked. Here we go again. Liz still thinks she's the editorial board of the New York Times. Laughter trickled through the conservative wing of the audience, but Warren didn't move. Funny how loud a man gets when silence would reveal too much. When he fears what silence will reveal, Kristen interjected, her voice firm. Senator Warren, are you accusing Senator Cruz of state-sanctioned disappearances? Warren answered without flinching. I'm documenting patterns. In Arizona, Utah, and Texas, we have affidavits from local sheriffs, sworn testimony, that they were instructed to deny Immigration Council access. We've filed FOIA requests with DHS that remain blocked. You want receipts? I brought them. Cruz cut in with a dismissive smirk. You mean the same receipts funded by George Soros in the DNC? Save the theater, Liz. Warren opened a folder slowly and slid out a series of documents. These receipts are signed by your appointees. Internal ICE memos, June 3rd, July 18th, October 2nd, explicitly authorizing transport of detainees without intake procedures under vague national security exceptions. I didn't fabricate these. Your office approved them. Cruz's jaw tightened. They were threats. We neutralized threats. That's leadership. Warren's voice dropped, quiet, grave. Threats don't vanish into black sites, Senator. Enemies do, and when you start deciding who disappears without trial, you're not protecting democracy. You're authoring its extinction. Kristen pivoted, sensing the tension rise. Senator Warren, some critics say your tone tonight has been more combative than clarifying. Are you here speaking on behalf of the Democratic Party? Warren shook her head. I'm speaking for the Constitution. It doesn't pledge allegiance to parties. I'm here because someone has to draw the line between the rule of law and the rule of fear. Cruz's voice hardened. I'm protecting Americans from real dangers. You don't understand the threats we face. Warren didn't blink. Then explain this. Over 60% of those detained under Executive Order E-014221 had no criminal record. Nearly 40% were minors, under the age of 16. A hush fell over the room. Warren slowly closed the folder. I've been accused of many things in politics, but I've never been accused of disappearing children. Kristen paused, then asked the next question. Her tone carried weight, like a dagger wrapped in velvet. Let's talk about what both of you did with power and what that reveals about the office. The studio fell still. The screen behind them dimmed. Warren had drawn a moral boundary. Cruz was about to cross it. Kristen looked directly at them. What limits a president? Law or conscience? Cruz leaned forward, both elbows on the table. His grin spread wide, hungry for airtime. They investigated me before I even took office. Not one peaceful day, not one, and still, I delivered more jobs, more growth, and more strength than anyone since Reagan. He let that hang in the air. Then came the punchline. You don't check a winner, you follow him. A few scattered claps broke out. Warren didn't move. She waited. And then, with razor clarity and calm, she sliced through the applause. They didn't check you because you were strong. They checked you because you feared the Constitution. Cruz blinked, trying to laugh it off. But Warren kept going. Let's count. 6 inspectors general removed. 1 judge publicly intimidated. You called the FBI corrupt scum. You tweeted that the Supreme Court hates America. And you told supporters to stand and fight when you lost. That's not oversight. That's a slow-motion coup. Cruz scoffed. Says the senator who redefined executive privilege to protect Wall Street regulators and campaign donors. A few gasps from the crowd. Warren didn't blink. I was investigated. I complied. I testified 11 hours under oath. No staff, no notes. You held rallies. Cruz interrupted. Because I had the people. Warren fired back instantly. No, you had their attention. You mistook it for trust. The audience shifted, tension rising. Kristen leaned back, letting the collision unfold. Cruz shrugged. So what? I governed. I brought dough, I slashed taxes, I cut deals they said were impossible. Warren leaned in, quieter, but every syllable landed like weight. You governed like America was your casino, one where the chips owed you loyalty. But public office isn't a payback plan. She paused, locking eyes with him. Because when power stops serving the public, it starts performing for itself. You weren't a president, Warren said coldly. You were the main act. Cruz grinned. And you were what? The usher? Warren didn't flinch. No, I was the reminder that the lights eventually come back on. And when they do, people notice who stole the silverware. The audience murmured. A tweet from Politico lit up the live feed. Warren to Cruz, you feared the Constitution. Summit turned seismic. Kristen turned back toward Warren. So your point, Senator, is that power has a moral boundary? Warren nodded without hesitation. A power without scrutiny breeds vengeance. And vengeance dressed up as justice burns every rule we've written together. She turned back to Cruz. You didn't come here to govern. You came to erase the parts of America that embarrassed you. For the first time that night, Cruz narrowed his eyes. He didn't interrupt. Warren addressed the audience directly. This isn't about ideology. It's about decency. I had failures, and I faced consequences. You declared war on accountability itself. She folded her notes gently, looked up. And when public office becomes a weapon, the republic becomes collateral. Kristen broke the silence. Let's talk about what each of you did with power and what that says about the office. The lights dimmed slightly as the segment shifted. The room exhaled. Warren opened a folder on the desk before her. She pulled out a grainy, black and white mugshot of a young Salvadoran man, his face digitally darkened, his eyes blurred. She placed it upright on the table between them. His name is Mario Tejada. He arrived in this country at age 9, lived in Maryland. No priors, no gang ties, just worked double shifts and sent money home to his mother. Cruz barely glanced at the photo. Warren's tone turned clinical, matter of fact. Your State Department reviewed his asylum file in 2019. They concluded he qualified for protection under the Convention Against Torture, but then your DHS overruled them. No hearing, no lawyer. He was picked up outside a construction site. Cruz leaned back, unmoved. We didn't have time for risks. People were dying in cities. We made a call. Warren didn't blink. You didn't make a call, you made a narrative. That photo? Your ICE office lightened the gang tattoos in the original, darkened his skin, and distributed it to media under the label MS-13 recruitment threat. Cruz smirked. That photo scared gangs. Mission accomplished. Warren's voice lowered. No, that photo scared voters. That was the mission. She slid another document across the table. Tejada is still in solitary confinement. 4 years, no trial, no charges. His family's legal requests have been denied under national security prerogatives. He's vanished inside a country that never judged him. Cruz scoffed. That's called protecting borders. Americans first. Warren didn't hesitate. That's called erasing people and pretending they never mattered. A long silence followed. Kristen interjected, measured. Senator Warren, are you saying the executive branch knowingly doctored evidence to justify indefinite detention? Warren nodded. Yes, and I say it knowing exactly what the stakes are. She looked directly into the camera. Because power that acts without process, without conscience, becomes tyranny. In a suit and a flag pin. Cruz waved his hand dismissively. It's always a lecture with her. Mario Tejada isn't the only story. We faced thousands. We stopped the caravans. We ended catch and release. We gave law enforcement their teeth back. Warren folded her hands, voice steady. You didn't give them teeth. You gave them confusion. You gave them fear. And you gave them a mandate to perform, not to protect. Cruz jabbed a finger. I kept Americans safe, Cruz insisted. Warren shook her head slowly. No, you kept them scared. That's a different job. Kristen followed up. Then why, Senator Cruz, was Mario Tejada never brought to trial if he was truly a legitimate threat? Cruz looked irritated. Because trials take time. We had intel. We acted. Warren raised an eyebrow. No, you didn't act. You reacted to polls, to headlines, to Fox News segments labeled invasion at the border. Cruz laughed bitterly. So we're supposed to wait until someone gets shot? He looked like a gang member. That's all I needed. Warren's eyes turned cold. Then you just rewrote the presumption of innocence into a marketing strategy. She tapped the photo gently. And now he's a ghost, not convicted, not acquitted, just buried in a system designed to make inconvenient faces disappear. A low murmur stirred across the room. The audience had gone still. Kristen turned to them. Is this how modern executive power should work? No one answered, but the silence was deafening, heavier than any verdict a courtroom could pronounce. The room sank into a hush. Kristen leaned forward again, voice calm, cool. What happens when courts can't stop a president? A flicker of recognition crossed Warren's face. Her response came with the precision of someone who had been waiting to say it for too long. Then we no longer have a court. We have a suggestion box. She gestured toward the camera. The Supreme Court has ruled before on the census, on DACA, on emoluments, and yet rulings without enforcement? They're sermons, you ignored them, and the system blinked. Cruz tilted his head, smirking. They ruled with me, and the people agreed. Warren leaned in, voice unwavering. No, they ruled with your shadow. What they upheld wasn't your policy, it was your chaos, wrapped in procedure, shielded by delay. She paused. The real law never got to speak. You buried it in appeals. You buried it in contempt. Cruz shrugged, casual and confident. That's the game. Delay, deny, distract. And we played it better. Warren didn't blink. You didn't play the game. You rigged it. You turned the Department of Justice into a campaign tool. You used pardon power like a bargaining chip. And you converted the courts into a PR agency. Only when it served you. Cruz lifted a finger. The courts never stop at me. Maybe that means I am the will of the people. The audience shifted uncomfortably. A camera zoomed in on Warren. Her voice dropped, razor sharp. That's the sentence every autocrat rehearses in the mirror. She held his stare a beat longer. Kristen interjected. Senator Warren, are you saying our institutions failed? Warren nodded once without drama. No, I'm saying they were failed by the very people entrusted to defend them. Courts can write decisions, but they can't storm the barricades. They can't arrest a lie in real time. Cruz interrupted smugly. They didn't need to. The country saw through the noise. That is why I'll be back. Warren didn't blink. No, the country didn't see through the noise. They saw through the law because you taught them that rules don't matter if you yell louder. Cruz folded his arms. They still voted for me. Warren returned instantly. 47% of the country voted to burn the house down. That's not a mandate. That's arson with polling data. Cruz chuckled. And yet, I'm still here. Warren pointed at him. Because no one dared to draw the line. Not your party, not the courts. Everyone waited for someone else to flinch. Kristen followed quickly. And what happens if no one ever draws that line? Warren's voice lowered, calm and certain. Then America becomes a house with no exits, just fire alarms we've taught ourselves to ignore. The studio lights dimmed, not by design but in sync with the mood. Cruz seized the silence. So you're saying democracy is weak? Warren corrected him. No, I'm saying democracy is patient. But patience isn't a shield, Warren said quietly. It's a timer. Cruz grinned. And when the clock runs out? Warren looked directly into the camera. Her words were deliberate, heavy. Then we find out whether this country was ever truly a republic or just a stage. Silence fell again, heavier this time. The kind of silence that presses into the lungs like a gathering storm. Kristen let it breathe, then turned to Cruz. And you believe the courts won't stand in your way? Cruz smiled, calm, assured, rehearsed. They never have. I made the system show its cards. Now I know how to play the deck. Warren's reply was cold and cutting. You didn't play the deck, you replaced the dealer. She turned to Kristen, and the game only ends when the players walk away. The camera panned back, catching the frozen stillness of the room. One side fire, the other ice. And in the center, a republic blinking, unsure if it had just been preserved or gutted. Then, without warning, Cruz seized the moment. He straightened his tie, stepped closer to the camera, and let the words fall like a prophecy carved in marble. I will return. The people demand it. The court won't stop it. A few in the audience stirred. The way he said return carried both promise and threat. Warren leaned back, eyes narrowing, not with fear, but with history. Returning doesn't mean redeeming, she said slowly. You mistake applause for absolution. But noise isn't grace, it's just echo. Cruz chuckled, brushing it off. You confuse tradition with truth. You're the museum tour. I'm the crowd that broke in. Warren didn't blink. You didn't break in. You slipped through a door left open by people who stopped caring. Cruz pressed further. People are ready to act. You're still waiting to think. We had record rallies, real energy. What did you have? Editorials? Warren nodded, acknowledging without agreeing. We had time, and yes, we wasted it. But at least we didn't weaponize the clock. The temperature in the room changed, a quiet tension. Cruz raised an eyebrow. You call it weaponizing. I call it momentum. Warren leaned forward. You call it momentum when the guardrails fall off and the bus keeps rolling. But some of us still remember where the brakes are. Cruz waved her off. Brakes? We're accelerating. That's what America voted for. Warren snapped back. No, they voted while tired, while scared, while misled. You offered the loudest noise in the room and called it a hymn. You turned rage into ritual. Cruz smiled, and the crowd sang it back. Warren's tone sharpened. They always do, until the fire reaches the balcony. That's when they realize it wasn't hallelujah, it was a match. Kristen stepped in, her voice firm but steady. And if this isn't just about elections anymore, then what is it about? There was a long pause. Then Warren exhaled. It's about consequence. Not just ballots, but boundaries. When a man breaks the law and wears it like a trophy, democracy doesn't argue. It hemorrhages. Cruz shrugged. Laws change. People evolve. That's politics. Warren answered immediately. People evolve, but they don't survive by lowering standards. They survive by raising them, especially when it hurts. Cruz leaned in, softer now. Pain is part of power. It proves we're alive. Warren cut in sharply. Pain is supposed to teach, not be taught. Silence returned. A beat, a breath. Then Cruz spoke again, calm, deliberate. You fear I'm coming back because I never really left. I live in the doubt you created, in the cynicism you couldn't kill. Warren replied, measured. You live in a wound, but this country still has marrow. It still builds. It still listens. And it doesn't have to follow you to remember who it is. Cruz's grin returned. But it will, Cruz said softly, because chaos is honest. Order is just a script, and people are done with fiction. Warren stood still, her eyes locked on his. You're right, she said. Fiction ends. But truth outlives actors. Kristen watched them, two poles, two Americas, like a pendulum caught mid-swing. Then she turned, not just to the candidates, but to the camera, to the audience, to the pulse beyond the stage. So which is it then? Hallelujah or hellfire? Neither answered, because history was still writing, not in that room, but outside. Outside the debate hall, floodlights clashed with protest signs. Screens blinked with breaking headlines. But one line drowned them all, re-uploaded 1,000 times in less than an hour. Democracy doesn't die, it dissolves, quietly, legally. It hit late-night monologues like a thunderclap. It crept into union newsletters. It became a TikTok duet soundtrack layered over riot footage, deportation raids, and courtrooms where no one spoke. Elizabeth Warren's voice echoed, not from a film script, but from a country struggling to remember what reality used to feel like. On MSNBC, Rachel Maddow blinked twice, then whispered, she just reframed the entire modern presidency in one sentence. On Fox, Jesse Waters smirked. If Elizabeth Warren misses being president, she sure auditioned hard tonight. But it wasn't cable news that carried the weight. It was thousands of young voters reposting the clip with one caption. This isn't about Cruz. It's about what we let power do while we binge-watched history. On Reddit, someone compiled a list of every executive order from both parties that bypassed Congress. The thread trended under a new title. We didn't elect kings, we normalized them. Even conservative libertarian forums quietly asked, if checks and balances are ceremonial, are we still a republic or just a ritual? Meanwhile, Cruz's campaign email blasted the event as a liberal pity parade, but donations didn't spike. Memes did. Most showed Cruz seated on a throne made of shredded ballots, captioned, the last king of the United States, self-crowned. And yet, the most haunting part wasn't the sound. It was the stillness that came after. That kind of silence only happens when everyone feels the edge, but no one knows which way the blade will swing. A final voice from a student protester in Philadelphia summed up what no broadcast could. I don't want to wait for a vote to tell me if I still live in a democracy. I want to know now.